turn now to a significant declaration from the White House official at the helm of this country's COVID response. Dr. Anthony Fauci says the pandemic phase of COVID in this country is over. He made those comments while speaking with PBS's Judy Woodruff yesterday evening. Dr. Fauci explained that COVID isn't going anywhere, but this country has come a long way from the case counts we were seeing back in January.
We are certainly right now in this country out of the pandemic phase. Namely, we don't have 900,000 new infections a day and tens and tens and tens of thousands of hospitalizations and thousands of deaths. We are at a low level right now. So if you're saying, are we out of the pandemic phase in this country? We are.
Dr. Fauci went on to say that some people may have to be vaccinated for COVID yearly in order to keep case counts low. Let's go live now to Washington, D.C., where Newsy White House correspondent Kellen Howell is standing by live. Kellen, a lot of people were taken aback by that comment because we're so used to being in a pandemic. What more can you tell us about Dr. Fauci's comments?
Well, it certainly is a major shift in tone from Dr. Fauci, Lisa. You know, we've heard him being asked by reporters over and over again, what is the path out of this pandemic? How do we get back to normal? And Dr. Fauci has repeatedly said that this would happen in phases and that eventually we would shift from being in a pandemic phase into what he has called an endemic phase. And so in these comments in this PBS interview, it's sounding like he's suggesting that we may be now in that endemic phase of this COVID situation, where rather than it being in control of Americans' day-to-day lives, that it's something that we have control over and have the tools now to deal with and live a normal life. And Dr. Fauci, as you pointed out earlier, talked about the low level of cases right now, the low rates of transmission, and how hospitalizations are nowhere near what we had seen before. And so all of these things indicate that we have shifted into that next stage of the pandemic. But he went on to talk a little bit more about what that life might look like, this new normal of living in the endemic phase of COVID. Listen.
So if you're saying, are we out of the pandemic phase in this country? We are. What we hope to do, I don't believe, and I've spoken about this widely, we're not going to eradicate this virus. If we can keep that level very low and intermittently vaccinate people, and I don't know how often that would have to be, Judy.
Dr. Fauci did go on to clarify that globally he thinks we still are in a pandemic because other countries are still facing much higher rates of transmission and hospitalizations than we are seeing here in the United States. But he did point to the fact that many Americans have already had an infection and so may have some form of immunity. And we've seen an increase in the number of people who have been vaccinated. So all of those things combined help to keep those transmission rates low. But I should point out for our viewers, Lisa, that Dr. Fauci did just say a few hours ago that he will not be attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner this weekend due to concerns about COVID-19 transmission at the dinner. At this time, President Biden is still expected to attend that event.
Let's talk about the CDC for a moment. The CDC just released a new study on the total number of infections that was pretty telling. Can you walk us through the findings and give us the major takeaways?
Yeah, well, the big headline here is that the CDC now estimates that a majority, about 60% of Americans have already been infected with COVID-19. I want to pull up some of these numbers for our viewers here just so we get a bigger picture of what that looks like across this country. And the CDC is saying that a lot of this is due to that major spike in cases that we saw from the Omicron wave this winter. So 60% of Americans overall have antibodies, even more in young children. 75% of children ages 11 and younger, the CDC estimates, have antibodies. And cases of COVID-19, however, are still rising. They're up 23% from last week, so something to keep in mind there. But the CDC estimating that undercounting has been a serious issue throughout this pandemic. And at one point, CDC was estimating that for every one confirmed case of COVID-19, there were 3 that were unreported. So that's why we're kind of seeing these new updated numbers now. But CDC officials are also saying that despite these numbers, which do indicate that most Americans have some level of antibody protection, they're still recommending that Americans should get vaccinated and should get booster shots because those vaccines provide the broadest form of protection against serious illness and hospitalization and death.